Vinnie Paul is a name that will always be linked to the loud drums and the heart of a wild, crazy time in metal. Not merely the drummer for Pantera. He was a symbol of strength, rebellion, and commitment to music, even when everything else fell apart. Vinnie didn't only keep time for the band, he played the drums with a lot of strength and used the famous double bass technique. He also lived by the motto "Live loud, die proud." He kept the hearts of millions of admirers around the world beating. He is one of the best heavy metal drummers of all time. Standing side by side with famous people like Lars Ulrich and Dave Lombardo. Cowboys from Hell, Vulgar Display of Power, and Far Beyond Driven were more than just important albums for Pantera. They showed how talented Vinnie was and how he lived by the play hard credo. But could the fame, the booze, and the thunder of the stage make him forget how empty he felt after his brother Dimebag Darrell was killed? He was always the light of the party, but he died alone and silently from heart disease at the age of 54. What made him that way? And what really was lost when the last drumbeat stopped? Let's take a look at Vinnie Paul's early life, the man who kept the beat for a whole generation. Even though he looked like a huge metal monster on stage, Vinnie Paul was really just a Texas boy who grew up with music and discipline. He was a strange mix of Southern heritage and rebellious instinct. He was born on March 11, 1964, in Abilene, Texas, to a family that was quite musical. Jerry Abbott, Vinnie's father, was a country musician, sound engineer, and subsequently a producer. He was the one who built the first home studio for his kids, where Vinnie and his younger brother, Darrell Lance Abbott, who later became known as Dimebag Darrell, had their first jam sessions. Vinnie was first told to play brass instruments in that small house full of strings and rhythms, but he quickly became interested in the drums and the primordial rhythm they made. Vinnie was a restless kid who loved loud sounds, quick tempos, and breaking the rules from an early age. Darrell was preoccupied with guitar technique, but Vinnie was more interested in renowned rock drummers like Peter Criss, Kiss, Alex Van Halen, and Tommy Aldridge. These drummers encouraged him to play with a lot of intensity and power. Vinnie was completely self-taught and relied only on instinct and feel, yet he had a rare natural sense of timing and rhythm. Vinnie and Darrell became best friends right away. They were more than brothers, they were musical soulmates who understood each other with every beat and riff. As teens, they started playing at local pubs, where the lights were low, the music went on for hours, and drunk metal fans screamed. Vinnie and Darrell formally started Pantera in 1981, when they were only 17 years old. At first, they played glam metal, which was fashionable at the time. Vinnie thought something was wrong, though, even with the makeup and sparkly clothes. He wanted a sound that was heavier, rougher, and more forceful. He and his brother discreetly got ready for a change, a real uprising that would change the history of heavy metal. Vinnie Paul's early life wasn't full with trauma or familial problems, but he did grow up in a professional musical setting. He was made into a warrior by an unbreakable link with his talented younger brother and a deep love of drumming. He was ready to fight in the tumultuous and immortal years to come. The journey with Pantera didn't start out in the spotlight. It was made from sweat, blood, and many long, unnoticed nights of hard work. When Vinnie Paul and his younger brother Dimebag Darrell started the band in 1981, they were simply two crazy Texas kids playing Van Halen covers in bars and chasing the glam metal fantasy with huge hair and glossy leather leggings. Like hundreds of other bands at the time, Pantera followed the glam metal trend and put out 4 albums on their own, but they never got much further than the American South. Vinnie was already a very disciplined drummer at that time. Not just in charge of the beat, but also of how the band is put together. Dimebag was the artistic heart, while Vinnie was the operational brain, serious, calm, and unchanging. They were like two ends of the same stream, entirely different but unable to live without each other. And even if their music hadn't become popular yet, their relationship as brothers never wavered. Pantera made a big move in 1987 when they hired Philip Anselmo to replace Terrence Lee as their lead singer. Phil brought in a fresh spirit that was raw, wild, and strong. Vinnie knew right away. There was no more glam metal. From that point on, Pantera entirely abandoned their flashy 80s skin and became something heavier, rougher, and angrier. Pantera was the first band to play a kind of music that would later be called groove metal. The first shot was fired in 1990 with Cowboys from Hell. Vinnie played drums like every fill was a punch to the face, and he locked in with penny sax razor-sharp riffs to make a sound that no one could miss. But that was just the beginning. Pantera became a monster with the release of Vulgar Display of Power in 1992. Vinnie wasn't just playing the drums anymore, he was in charge of them. Walk, This Love, Mouth for War, all based on foundations that Vinnie placed like concrete that can't be broken. He didn't need to be fast to impress. He crushed listeners with weight, space, and even military-like accuracy. Pantera became the most aggressive response to metal at a time when thrash metal was fading and grunge was booming. Vinnie kept the music going. Pantera weren't just revolting, they were taking over by the time they released Driven in 1994. The album came in at number 1 on the Billboard 200, which is practically impossible for a pure metal band with no radio hits and no compromise. Vinnie kept running the show behind the scenes, from production and sound control to tour plans and even, at times, controlling Phil. He was getting more and more addicted and hurting himself. But the more Pantera got famous, the more they broke up. Phil Anselmo got more and more distant and unstable, and he routinely missed recording sessions. Vinnie, who was always a rigid perfectionist, couldn't stand the lack of discipline. He thought it was more than simply a bandmate leaving, it was his family being betrayed. Vinnie attempted to stay calm, but Phil didn't. The fun of playing turned into gloomy moods, long, hard tours that lasted for months, and growing anger among the band members. Dimebag was in the middle of a fight between his brother and the singer he used to stand next to. Pantera's last albums were The Great Southern Trendkill, 1996, and Reinventing the Steel, 2000. The music was still fierce, but the band was no longer a single unit. Phil lost interest and moved on to other things. Pantera split up in 2003. No handshake, no apologies, just fury and quiet that was hard to bear. It wasn't just the end of a band for Vinnie Paul, it was the end of everything in his life. Pantera wasn't just a profession for him, it was the tie between him and his brother, the living proof of all they had worked on together since they were youngsters playing music in their father's garage. The breakup didn't simply end his career. It took away a part of him. But Vinnie didn't realize that the worst anguish was still to come. That night would leave a wound on his heart that would never heal. From then on, Vinnie would never be the same. Death and new life. Vinnie Paul almost retreated from the stage when Pantera broke up in silence and anger. He wouldn't talk about the band, stayed away from the press, and retreated into his own world, where recollections of a once great metal empire had gone to ashes. But he still loved music. Vinnie and his brother Dimebag Darrell decided to start again in 2003. They didn't want to be Pantera anymore, so they formed a new band named Damageplan. They made the album Newfound Power with the hopes of making something new. Not Pantera 2.0, but something they could completely control. With Damageplan, the brothers could finally say what they wanted without the long-standing problems they had with each other. They went on tour, and when they got back on stage, they had the same energy as before. But this time, they were more careful, tired, and a little empty. Vinnie realized that Damageplan could never take the place of Pantera, no matter how much they tried to smile. It couldn't fix the cracks in their hearts, either. Then, in December 2004, one night changed Vinnie Paul's life forever. An armed man entered the stage at the El Rosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, on December 8, when Damageplan was playing. He shot Dimebag Darrell dead directly in front of Vinnie's eyes. Nathan Gale, the gunman, was a former Marine who was suffering from delusional psychosis. He thought Dimebag had stolen his songs, and he arrived that night with a definite goal: to kill an artist who was loved by millions. He shot 15 times, killing 4 people, and was only stopped when a police officer ran up to the stage and shot him dead. Vinnie was only a few steps away. He watched his brother, who was also his musical soulmate and collaborator for more than 20 years, fall on the stage they had called home. There are no words that can explain that level of suffering. No brother is ever ready to see his brother killed on stage. After something like that, no musician can keep playing. A portion of Vinnie's soul died with Dimebag that night, and from then on, he wasn't Vinnie Paul of Pantera anymore. Vinnie went missing again after Dime died. He turned down all opportunities to work together. Even stopped talking to friends they used to be close to. He lived a calm, private life with only his girlfriend Chelsea and a lot of drink. Not to become drunk, but to forget. Vinnie didn't play drums again for over 3 years, and this time it wasn't with his brother but with people he didn't know. Vinnie was asked to join Hell Yeah in 2006. A metal supergroup made up of people from Mudvayne and Nothingface. He said no right away. He once quipped, "I have nothing left to play." But after a lot of begging, he said he would give it a shot, just once. He cried at that first jam session, not because it sounded good, but because he felt like he could breathe again for the first time since that terrible night. Dimebag was one of a kind. But when he played with Hell Yeah, he was back behind the drums, sweating, and feeling the yells and bass resonate through his chest. This is something that only a stage performer can really grasp. Pantera was not Hell Yeah. It didn't have to be. It was a new beginning for Vinnie. Their first album came out in 2007, and Vinnie officially came back to the metal scene, not as a legend but as a survivor. He went on tour with Hell Yeah, put out additional records, and tried to live a regular life in the years that followed, but people who knew him could tell. Vinnie never really got over Dimebag's death. He constantly wore a pendant with his brother's ashes in it. There was always an empty chair next to his drum set where Dime used to sit. And there was always a silence inside him that no one could fill. He once said, "I wouldn't be alive." And so he stayed. Playing, screaming, laughing, drinking, and living, battered, but unbreakable. It was the only way Vinnie Paul knew how to survive hell. Personal life. On stage, Vinnie Paul was the embodiment of raw energy, long hair draped over a beaming face, a smile that never faded, and drum hits that felt like punches thrown into the air. Offstage, he was known as the soul of every party, a man with seemingly endless energy. Vinnie loved the noise, loved the booze, loved the laughter, and loved making sure everyone around him had a good time. In the metal world, he wasn't just Pantera's drummer, he was the ultimate host, the man behind the legendary all-night parties where beer, rock and roll, and brotherhood blended into something sacred. The symbol of that lifestyle was the cocktail he and Dimebag loved most, the Black Tooth Grin, a mix of Crown Royal and Coke, strong, dark, and sweet, just like the music they played. From backstage tour hangouts to living rooms in Texas, the Black Tooth Grin served as a toast to unbreakable brotherhood and a way for Vinnie to keep his brother's memory alive in every raised glass. But after Dimebag's death, the drink became a double-edged sword. Fueling his laughter while concealing the silence no one was allowed to see. Despite being present at nearly every major party, Vinnie was intensely private about his personal life. He never married and had no children, not because he didn't want to, but because for him, music and Dimebag were relationships deep enough to leave no room for anything else. For many years, he was in a long-term relationship with Chelsea Yeager, a model nearly 2 decades his junior. She was more than just a girlfriend. She was a quiet companion who stood by him through countless shows, sharing both the spotlight and the silent moments backstage. Vinnie once said he didn't like being alone, but he didn't need a crowd either. What he truly needed was music, whiskey, and memory. 3 things that could either destroy you or save you. Those close to him recalled that even though he was the life of every party, when he returned to his room, he would often sit alone, quietly playing old Pantera tapes or setting out an empty chair next to his drum kit for Dimebag. For Vinnie, there was no such thing as getting over the pain. There was only learning to live with it. He once dreamed of writing a cookbook titled Drumming Up an Appetite with Vinnie Paul, or he would share his favorite recipes mixed with backstage stories full of laughter and liquor. That book was never completed. Like so many things in Vinnie's life, it remained an unfinished plan. A man who spent his life playing drums, but carried within him a void no one could ever fill. A man who could shake thousands of fans to their core, yet sat silently through long, lonely nights. That was Vinnie Paul. A man who lived for music as if there were no tomorrow, and loved his late brother as if he were still right there beside him, guitar in hand, ready to tear the world apart one more time. Final years. Though he had entered his 50s and carried a scar that would never heal from Dimebag's death, Vinnie Paul never once stepped away from the stage. For him, music wasn't just a career. It was an escape, the only way he could survive everything he had lost. With Hell Yeah, he continued releasing albums, touring, and living out the same play hard spirit he had in the Pantera days, as if the years of tragedy had never happened. And yet, even as the lights still blazed and the drums still thundered, people began to notice something. Vinnie had changed. He still smiled, still partied, still roared every time he took the stage, but his eyes, once lit with boundless life, now held a quiet melancholy. Behind the familiar swagger was a man who had grown increasingly withdrawn, a survivor more than a warrior. Even in the middle of the crowd, Vinnie kept a subtle distance, a hollow space that only Dimebag had ever been able to fill. He rarely spoke of the past. Whenever asked about Pantera or Dimebag, Vinnie would deflect, offering short replies or a faint, strained smile. But no one blamed him. Everyone understood. Some pains can only be endured in silence because to speak of them would be to shatter. At an age when many musicians chose to rest, Vinnie kept living as if racing against time. One concert after another, endless studio sessions, parties without pause, it was as if his life beat to a drum rhythm that wouldn't allow him to stop. But his body could no longer keep pace with the heart of an immortal rocker. Age and unbalanced lifestyle, and years of emotional and physical wear finally began to take their toll. On June 22, 2018, Vinnie Paul was found dead in his sleep at his Las Vegas home. The cause was determined to be dilated cardiomyopathy, a heart condition that weakens the heart's ability to pump blood, combined with severe coronary artery disease. He passed away at the age of 54 without any final words, no stage lights, no drum solo, just a quiet night. It was a departure that contrasted starkly with the way he lived, but perhaps it was the only way he could finally rest after decades of living each day like it might be his last. Vinnie was laid to rest beside Dimebag Darrell at Moore Memorial Gardens Cemetery in Arlington, Texas. 2 caskets. Side by side, etched with the names of the two brothers. Warriors who had together written the most glorious chapter of groove metal, now reunited in the same earth, as if they had never been apart. There was no grand ceremony, no public funeral, but the global metal community fell silent in mourning. Artists from Metallica, Anthrax, Slipknot, Lamb of God, and more shared tributes. Thousands of fans brought candles, Pantera shirts, drumsticks, and black-toothed grin tattoos to the cemetery to say their goodbyes. In a rock and roll world where legends often come and go amid scandal and noise, Vinnie Paul chose a different path, quiet, steadfast, and fiercely loyal, to music, to his late brother, and to the values he never betrayed. His final years were not a closing chapter, but a last affirmation that no matter what fell apart, would keep drumming until his heart could no longer follow the beat. Legacy and impact. Vinnie Paul was not the fastest drummer, nor the most complex, and he never sought to show off his technique just to prove a point. But with every strike, whether the machine gun blast of Becoming or the slow crushing pound of Walk, he created his own language, a language of weight, precision, and the rawest instincts of heavy metal. Together with Dimebag Darrell, Vinnie didn't just give Pantera its soul, he helped give birth to an entirely new genre, groove metal. At a time when thrash was fading, grunge dominated the airwaves, and many metal bands were compromising just to survive, Pantera, driven by Vinnie's hammering drums, stood tall, refused to bend, and pulled metal back to its primal brutality. Vinnie's influence wasn't just in the music he played, but in the way he lived and kept the fire burning for the metal community. He was the kind of artist who never acted like a star, always ready to hug a fan, raise a drink with anyone after a show, and share backstage stories like an old friend. That authenticity made him a legend who didn't need to be idolized, just remembered. Many drummers of the next generation openly acknowledged his impact. Chris Adler, Lamb of God, Joey Jordison, Slipknot, Jason Bittner, Shadows Fall, all named Vinnie as a role model, not just for his playing, but for his mastery of space, his ability to maintain groove in a genre that can easily descend into chaos. Vinnie wasn't just a drummer, he was the emotional conductor of the entire song, the lifeline that kept the band from falling apart. His legacy was also clear in how he stayed true to himself and his philosophy until the very end. He never chased trends, never forced himself to change to please the market, never cashed in on a Pantera reunion. Vinnie understood the real value of being an artist and he never sold it short. That's why even though Hell Yeah never reached the heights of Pantera, the community respected him deeply because he never stopped fighting. Today, the name Vinnie Paul isn't just listed among the greatest metal drummers, it's etched into a golden era. A time when heavy metal didn't need gimmicks, stages didn't need laser lights, and artists didn't need scandals to be seen. He was the primal beat, the foundation, the pulse beneath the skin of every true metal believer. At the cemetery in Arlington, Texas, beside Dimebag Darrell's grave, there is a headstone engraved with the words "Don't ever think it's not worth it. Fight until you can't." That line isn't just a life philosophy. It's the entire life of Vinnie Paul, the man who kept time for an entire generation, not with words, but with drum beats born from a heart full of blood, full of fire, and that never once knew surrender. Vinnie Paul didn't fade away like a dying star. He went out like one final drum beat echoing through the darkness, loud enough to awaken, deep enough to haunt, and real enough to never be forgotten. He didn't need radio hits, million-dollar studios, or spotlights shining on his name. All he ever needed was his drum kit, a brother with a guitar by his side, and a crowd of screaming fans, and that was enough for a life worth living. From piecing together riffs in his father's garage to topping the Billboard charts with Pantera and finally shattering into Blood and Tears in Columbus, Vinnie Paul walked a path no one else could ever replicate. He was the embodiment of loyalty to music, to Dimebag, and to his own true self, even if it cost him his youth, his family, and ultimately his life. What do you think of the life of Vinnie Paul? A journey filled with pain, fire, and unbreakable spirit. To you, what is the greatest legacy he left behind? Was it the relentless drum beats? The brotherhood that defied death, or the live, loud spirit that never once broke? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to keep joining us on the journey through the immortal legends of rock and metal.